This story is of my own original creation. Please do not use my story, characters, or voice without my permission. Chica's Diary, Chapter 4. A Day Out to Town. Dear Diary, I was suddenly awoken by a sharp noise that shot through the ears, like an arrow. In an instant, I grabbed my loyal dagger and swiftly leapt to my feet, ready to defend my host. When my gaze landed on Cup, he looked at me in an amused smile before pointing to the pot that was blowing out steam over the fire. The familiar fishy scent drifted over me, relaxing my hands and making my stomach boom. I was eager to have some, but then realized I was thinking with no care for manners. Lady Jane wasn't where she was last resting, so I went to search her room. Ashamedly, I forgot my manners again and had barged in without knocking. My siblings always did say my manners were as lost on me as a blade is without its edge. Jane's room was empty of her, but instantly I was drawn to the untidiness of the bed. I laid out the bed carefully. Any protruding root-like spots or mound blemishes would be flattened out. Then I felt embarrassed by my mindless actions. What my siblings say of my manners is true, but allow me to defend myself, diary. So often, my siblings would be forgetful of their morning duties. Only Bonnie, the most duty-bound, would clean his beddings every day. With the others, I took it upon myself to care for them, to fix their messy beds when they'd forgotten. On top of this reason, Lauren and I would leave our bed in a mess by the grace of the morning. We agreed that whoever woke up last would fix the bed, and I was so often comfortable in those sheets, I would be the one to fix them. I only hope Lady Jane doesn't find my intrusion to be rude. I wondered where Jane could have been. I knew he was only joking, but Cup said the blight must have caught her, which deeply unsettled me. An energy grew to my body, and I had almost swiftly left the house if it weren't for my sensible brother. He called to me, then pointed to my room, which rested some of my energy. I still kept a swift pace in case I had to rush outside. Bless Lady Nature, Lady Jane was there. She had not noticed me, and simply stared out the window. Her gaze reminded me of my own, filled with a longing and sorrow. Gentle were her hands, clinging to the bottom frame, as light lay tenderly on her shoulder. My energy now rushed to my thoughts. I wanted to help her, to understand, but I didn't quite understand it myself. What could she have been missing? I lost myself in my want to help her, so I allowed my stalwart arrows to rattle in my sheath. I quickly froze, like a deer standing to listen, and she looked at me like a wolf who'd heard something. Then my face grew warm. I was such a fool, and felt so ashamed that I apologized for sneaking up on her. So kind. Lady Jane weeded my apology and replanted confidence. We slipped into an awkwardness that I now felt ashamed of. I hated that word's decayed on my tongue. With no other thought in mind, I rushed to ask what she was thinking about. Oh, how my body flared like Mount Seld, spewing a shamed melted heap onto my face. I would have dropped to my knees if it weren't for Jane's calming presence. My gracious host, she was so open to me. I felt honored that she'd tell me something so close to her heart. This room she lent me, it was her son's. She spoke so gently of his adoption, and how the view from the window reminded her of him. My heart sank. I did not know what happened to him, nor did I want to press the question. But I knew the pain, the loss of someone who was no longer there for you. I was eager to bring her some happiness, and I thought Perhaps my cooking, though inferior to her skills, would cheer her up. Jane said she had already eaten. Then I thought, perhaps she could accompany me to the town. I planned to fix me and my companion's situation of not having any money. It'd be a good opportunity to just spend more time with each other. Unfortunately, Lady Nature's gifts were bountiful today. Just right for fishing, my host said. I was disheartened, unable to bring Jane any comfort, and I also wanted to desperately spend time with her, but it seemed it wasn't right. I thought of one last thing, to ask her if I could accompany fishing with her tomorrow. I had gone fishing with Lauren before, and I loved it. I was much more skilled on hunting on land, but hunting in the fields of water was thrilling, and I missed it with a heavy heart. Bless Lady Nature. She was happy to have me accompany her tomorrow. My joy leapt to my thoughts. Then soon my stomach voiced its opinion, rumbling loudly. I laughed so sharply, while Lady Jane laughed much more gently. How gracious she was, offering the use of her kitchen to cook. I lightly stepped away from the room and made myself some food. I took those eggs I had found the first day I was here and fried them on the pan. I was grateful that the utensils here were so similar to the ones back home. While I cooked, Cup was being himself again. So inconsiderate, he rambled on about questions I could have asked Jane. I waved my hand through him, which he then flew backwards to avoid me, followed by stern yelling. I couldn't help but laugh at his frustration. I ate my eggs, while Cup continued to rant at me. Then we rushed off to meet up with my loyal companion Lafayette and the compassionate English. When I arrived at English's farm, I spotted my companions sitting on the floor of the porch together. There were two empty plates of what I assumed to be beans sitting beside them. We greeted each other in the morning's grace before I told Lafayette of my trip to go into town. I explained how we could possibly sell the skins I had harvested here. English was eager to join us, and she accompanied our journey. I was happy to have her in our pack. Pup wasn't as welcoming. He wasn't ungrateful for her company, but he was always careful of new people, despite English's great display of loyalty in our battles. As we walked to town, the two told tales of their morning. I found it funny when English recalled bumping the door against Lafayette as he slept outside, having to push hard to make enough room to slip out. Even after such a forceful push, Lafayette would still not wake. I knew better not to ask why he chose to sleep outside instead of inside, so I asked how it felt to sleep on solid soil. I already knew the answer, but it was amusing to hear him confirm that he slept as undisturbed as a stone. This is why I could never invite him to a hunt with my siblings. You must be able to wake in the morning's grace, and he could never. Waking him was as challenging as hunting. When we entered town, our pack spotted a strong, wheat-haired man trying to swat away a chicken. Despite his strong physical looks, he was weak in his strikes and trembled. It was nice to see another familiar animal here. I did not know if that chicken was part of a farmer's flock, so I loosed an arrow at the chicken's feet, and it clucked away. Lafayette called this man a stripper, which I was confused about. I never heard the word, so Lafayette explained it to me. His explanation closely resembled stories hunters would tell during hunts. The one that comes to mind is the Lady of the Night. This monster was not a lady, but promised itself to be one, a creature with an infallible and beautiful voice who'd whisper to those weak hunters at the grace of night. You'd wake from your sleep, tired, and hear the monster's sweet voice promising to fulfill your desires. The tales would end with no satisfaction, much like the hunters, who'd be lured into the Lady of the Night's den and would find no pleasure. The story was always thrilling to hear, one of my favorites, but Lafayette's description was much more tame and explained it as a duty. The wheat-haired man thanked me for the help. English asked what had happened, and he explained his search for love, which he had spent his whole day on, when this chicken started to hunt him. He explained the rising aggression of the island's animals, which piqued my suspicions. I looked to my brother, who was also thoughtfully taking note. I couldn't think much more of it, though, as we were all eager to visit the shop. English knew the place well, so she rushingly led the pack over to it. I didn't take much notice of my surroundings. I was much more focused on the owner of this shop. This man was tiny compared to Cup, being half his size. I did not think there could be anyone in the world smaller than my brother. Cup was a foot smaller than most people, and me and my siblings all believed he'd grow taller, but he didn't. I always teased how I stole his extra height, as I was a foot taller than most people. What a pair we were. I abruptly started to laugh, which my companions all looked to me confused. Tup knew the origins of my laughter, and moved to a corner to sulk and yell at me. His words held truth in their tone, and I felt a bit bad, but was too overtaken by this surprise. He was flusteredly yelling as I wheezed my final laughs. I apologized to him, to which he seemed to reluctantly accept. I rejoined my companions, who were already in discussion about trade with the shopkeep. The man was too short for the counter, so English had lifted him up onto it so we could properly talk. I had to hold in my laughter. Cup's sake. English took the lead on the negotiations, knowing the worth of their currency more than Lafayette or I did. She had managed to sell both my skins, the tusked hogs and sharks, for 8 gold coins. How strange it was to have coins made of melted earth, but it made sense. Melted earth was difficult to forge, and was very valuable. I brushed my finger across the gold coin, and it felt smooth. Soda-wood coins were rough to touch, and felt magically warm. I missed following the ridges of the shell patterns on them, but this coin also had its likeness. I asked English how to tell if it's valuable, to which she replied the material and the color. I learned a lot today. Our pack left the town, and at the split of the road I said farewell to my loyal companions. As we walked to Lady Jane's home, Clep and I talked briefly about what the wheat-haired man said about the animals. Now there was peace. Surely it wasn't a coincidence that the beasts were growing as aggressive as the plants. I looked at the bottle of blue dust and wondered if this was the origin of the trouble. It disheartened me and disgusted me to have our goddess be plagued by a blight. Cup was sensible, knowing it wasn't good to hold a heavy heart, and retold the tale of my misunderstanding when we watched those novellas with Lafayette and his mamma. I thought they were in real danger and acted swiftly to help. I didn't know what actors or a stage play was until that day. Oh, the mess I had to apologize for. Cup hung that over me like the stars ever since, and it still frustrates me till my cheeks warm. I know that was vengeance for my earlier joke on him. Swine. Still, the message was clear. We didn't know enough, so I held back my energy. When I arrived, I found Jane was already asleep in her room. I had made it in my mind that our reading was a routine, so I was disappointed, but was excited again as I remembered about the promise of tomorrow. I will sleep shortly, so that in the grace of the morning I will prepare for our hunt out at sea. End of Chica's Diary, Chapter 4. Chapter 5. Fishing. I had only closed my eyes for what seemed to be a few hours before I heard my sister clambering awake. filled with boundless excitement. I felt her hands through me, while whispering eagerly to wake me. It took much effort, as all the other times, for me to hold back a smile, as she got more frustrated at my reluctance. I pretended to struggle to get my eyes open, and, once I took in the nightly lit room, I wondered again why my sister was up so early. Morning hadn't graced the earth, yet Chica was full of energy and eager to work. Work on what, though? I wasn't sure, but I suspected something. We left Jane's home, venturing not far out into the woods, and as we traveled, my sister explained herself. With my knowledge on the skill, I was to guide her on crafting a spear for the hunt. Her bow and arrows would be useless under water, and her dagger, no matter how hard she'd toss, wouldn't pierce the water's ground, or be long enough to reach her target. As it's always been said, it is best to be prepared for your hunt, and we both took that to heart. My suspicions were right, and I felt honored, even a bit glorified, she'd ask me, though there was no one else she could possibly ask. It was clear she entrusted me deeply with the task. I guided her to find a sturdy sapling and to carve it from there. The base was smoothed out, and the tip was sharpened to a violent end. It was shorter than most, but that's how it had to be, in order to accommodate Chica's more swift and flexible tactics. When she was done, morning had graced us, and the light shined on the glorious spear. It was no Bazifar's spear, unfortunately. If we had the material, and Lorne was here, he'd help craft those glorious weapons, capable of swiftly gliding through the water with no resistance. That isn't to say our spear wasn't good for fishing. It's just not made especially for it. I wish I knew how to craft Bazifar spears, or at least had owned one while I was alive. What a great blessing that would be. I long to hold one in my hands. She had no experience, so in preparation, we scouted out to find some beasts to test the spear's spirit. There were so many options, but my sister wasn't skilled enough to hit smaller creatures, such as birds, so we continued to search. Eventually, we found a swine among the brush, and Chica carefully snuck up on the beast. The hunt ended swiftly when she hurled the spear, and it expertly found its mark. The swine fell with no twitch or noise, laying silent. She took her spear from the lodging and harvested the beast, dagger smoothly separating skin from flesh. Gloriously, her hands were fresh from the harvest when she placed a bone from the beast into her asin. When we returned to Jane's home, she was already awake and heating up more of that disgusting fish drink. I could only imagine horror that was the visceral smell of it. It got worse when my sister slurped up the thing, making a low gutting noise that made me feel the viscosity. Luckily, my body was incapable of matching my feelings. Why does she love this? Squid balls were one thing, but this is just terrible. Oh, how I miss the bounties from Lady Nature's earth. Nothing from her depths could compare to the bounties of soil, sprouts and berries, fungus and bark, delicate crops, all of which I missed so dearly. Soft beans, which I envied Lafayette and English for having swallowed whole. If only I could join them. How ikhe would grow from the branches in bunches, and their sweet crunchy taste would carry my swooned heart. Why did she not love these? Other than that painful experience, Jane, falsely tender as always, checked up on Chica, as we had left with no warning. I tried to warn her not to explain anything, but she was too trusting of people. Luckily, my sister's tongue remained decayed, and she spoke little explanations. Jane's smile was forgiving, and she didn't ask more from her. But I wouldn't let the weapon of my heart down. If Chica was going to be reckless, then I would have to be exceedingly careful for her safety. Satisfied and full, Jane took Chica to her ship. We followed a worn road through the forests below the cliffs, which led to a dock. There, Jane's vessel stood gloriously on the water. I'll admit that. It looked fat and hefty, as there was so much on the ship, far different from Lauren's. There was a cabin, which held a place for harvesting, and a small bed for resting. Strangely, there was a clustering of threads on the back of the boat that Chica hadn't noticed. She was far too trapped in talking with Jane. I wondered what the purpose was, and I soon found out as we ventured onto the fields of water. The thing behind the boat was called a net, and it was a kind of trap. As the ship carved through the skin of the sea, Jane had some bait in the net, and fish would jump up and get trapped within it. It was a glorious and effective trap, which I never thought Jane would create. I had to admit, this trap was clever in design, and it showed she had some skill. As the trip continued on, I began to wonder when we'd be fishing. Matching my mind, Chica asked Jane about this, and she said the most disappointing words. This was fishing. I was so lost, and so was Chica. Jane noticed this and then showed this weird tool. It was a long, sturdy branch with thread along it. A sharp curve was tied to the end of the thread, and Jane explained how this was how she fished. Stopping the vessel, she threw the sharpness into the field of water, and we waited minutes before the thread turned tight, and Jane pulled out the bounty of one fish. I grew so sorrowful as I realized quickly that it would be best to separate our fishing from this island's fishing. For distinguishing, it'd be more accurate as well to call what we were expecting, what Kahika had called the activity, spearing. The use of Bazafar's unique spears for hunting in the depths would bring our tribe to call it spearing, but we were used to calling it what the Bazafar tribe would, fishing. Oh, how the thrilling memories of spearing infested my mind when I could still touch and taste. My sister would eagerly speak of her spearing. I was envious, and still am, that I would never be able to spear, but once I was bound to my sister, I got to join her and Lauren. They went spearing not often, but once their struggles grew to burdening, they would sail out, and the two would find peace. I remember the hours just spent spearing in the depths, the glorious beasts we'd see, and the honorable harvests. Though I had no blood, with every hunt I could imagine the piercing power it would take if it could. But this was terrible, and I was trapped here. What was I supposed to do other than count the fish? I watched Chica try her skills at fishing, which was amusing as she struggled with waiting. Our lives were built on the back of work. My sister refused to not have her hands not working on something. If she was sitting still for too long when there was work to be done, she'd grow in energy until it bursted. Though, here, I didn't expect it to happen in the way that it did. The boat remained still, as Jane had to take what fish she had caught from the net. I was curious on how the trap worked, so I didn't see what had happened outside. I heard a loud impact against the water, but Jane didn't seem to notice, lacking any awareness. I looked to where it could have come from. Then I took notice of Chica's skins laying on the ground, with no sight of her. Worry took me, but I wasn't afraid, as I knew my sister was capable. I swiftly came to a conclusion, then dived into the water to confirm it. What a sight to behold! Chica was wrestling with a fish twice her size and length. The beast had long fins, and its skin was the color of Lafayette's armor, though I doubted to be as stalwart. I was shocked as the fish fought back with a blade jutting out from its gill. Chica swiftly loosened her grip and used the fish's desire to escape against it, dodging the hit, but precariously holding onto its tail end. With frantic swipes, the fish broke free and looked as if to swim away, but in truth it was repositioning itself to charge. Spikes jutted out of the fish's gills once more, and it circled around my sister while spinning swiftly to use the blades like swords. Unfortunately for the beast, Chica's energy had built up, and now she had a vessel to unleash it on. With her loyal spear by her side, she blocked each hit, which chipped away at the wooden sides. Then, seeing an ample opportunity, Chica took powerful force and wielded it into her thrust. The spear rammed into the beast's head, leaving it twitching and losing strength until it forfeited the hunt. The corpse limped in the water, and blood trailed out like dandelion seeds fluttering in the wind. With powerful kicks, Chica held onto the spear and pulled the corpse of the fish up to the surface. How glorious the hunt was! If I was there, blood would boil and my spirit would fly to share my sister's victory. Even still, I feel a ghostly warmth of excitement. It was a sight to see, watching Chica toss the corpse up onto the vessel. Her strength surprised me sometimes. She wiped to clean the water from her body, and then rewore her skins as Jane came rushing over. Relief washed away worry. I saw it on Jane's face. She asked what had happened, and then Chica explained with a decayed tongue that she'd dived into the water to hunt this fish. Jane was amused, maybe impressed as well, but she spoke softly to Chica not to do that again. I argued to Chica, but she didn't voice my thoughts, deciding to listen to Jane and follow her word. Fortunately for Chica and me, we could occupy our time with harvesting her catch. Chica insisted we give the bounties to Jane as a gift, which I argued again with her, but it was hers to do with. She hunted it after all. What we did keep for ourselves, though, was a bone for Chica's assan and the beast's blades. Chica's dagger carefully separated the tender flesh, removing the blades from the fish, and we began preparations, once the harvest was done, to whittle the blades into a spear. The blades were sturdy and sharp, but were no match for the power of Chica's loyal dagger. This took some practice, but luckily we harvested enough blades to where Chica managed to fashion one into a good spearhead. When we arrived back on land, we found a good sapling and created a sticky adhesive to bind sturdy the spearhead and base. Now we had a new spear that shined even more in the achievement of Chica's victory. By the end, Jane caught a total of 62 fish, plus my sister's catch. Chica argued with me that my math was wrong, but math was never a skill she mastered, despite her confidence in me being wrong all the time. When we arrived back into the house, Jane had charred the fish Chica had caught to a tenderness, a dish looking so beautiful that I'd even enjoy it. If she was genuine, Jane was a good cook and a better host. Though I'm still stalwart to trust her, I understand Chica's attachment and the importance she means. I'm glad out of all the people who could have looked over my sister's care, Jane was one of them. Chica's Diary. End of chapter 5. Thank you for listening. I'm so sorry the audio keeps getting messed up in some spots. I'm still learning how to use this mic. Uh, chapter 4 was still based on a D&C session, as the rest, but chapter 5 was actually based on what Chica did between sessions. My DM asked what our characters would be doing in between sessions, and I already set it up that Chica was gonna hang out with Lady Jane. So that's what we did. And that's why I decided chapter 5, the perspectives should switch the cup because I thought it'd be more interesting and it helped distinguish itself from the other chapters. Well, hopefully you enjoyed listening. Goodbye. The one that comes to mind is the Lady of the Night. This monster was not a lady, but promised itself to be one, a creature with an infallible beauty. Oh no.